I can see that.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to our Women in Technology speaker series. Today, I'm really excited to be interviewing Sue Fraser, who's a managing director of JPMorgan and EMEA head of technology. Sue has spanned many different leadership roles during her time at JPMorgan and forged a highly successful career in technology and finance. So I really look forward to hearing more about her various roles. And yeah, firstly, Sue, if you would like to maybe just introduce yourself and give a brief background overview for our listeners, that would be fantastic.
No, I'd be delighted. So just to clarify my role, so I am the Chief Technology Officer for Europe. So it's a position that was really created primarily because of Brexit. And so as you can tell from my accent, obviously, I'm English, and I've been working for the company based out of the UK for my whole career. But what we did recently was we made a decision that because of the now essentially Brexit and starting to establish a European headquarters, which will be in Germany, the need to actually sort of create some leadership from a technology perspective for the bank is quite important. So my boss is the EMEA CIO, and so he has the overarching sort of responsibility for the region. So my focus is very much on Europe and our essentially our European headquarters. I've been with JP Morgan for 20. I'm coming up for 27 years this year, which is just an extraordinary number. I can't believe it. And yeah, as you rightly say, very varied, very career across all sorts of disciplines in terms of technology. And that's one of the nice things I think about technology is you can work across development, you can work in production, you can work in controls, you can work in projects and programs. So it's from that perspective, it's always really interesting. I'm married. I have two daughters, both at university, and neither of them want to pursue a career in technology. So I don't know whether or not I've succeeded or failed.
Great. Okay, so 27 years. There's definitely a lot to dig into and to hear about there.
Yeah.
But firstly, just obviously a lot of our listeners are undergrad students, so most of our kind of listeners go to UCD or various other universities. But just because of that, would you like to maybe tell us a bit about your undergrad level or kind of how you got to where you were? Um, from your LinkedIn, I think
Yeah.
it was Aston University you were studying in.
I did, yes, that's right. So I went to Aston, oh gosh, in 1985, which again, so sometimes when I think about how many years ago, and some of my friends, we reminisce in terms of how long we've actually known each other. So I decided, I really had no clue, in terms of what I wanted to do, and sometimes I think I'm not quite sure if I know what I want to do now, but at that time I had no clue. So I thought that I would try and do a degree that would give me pretty much a more sort of vocational, more general sort of background. So I did a degree in basically in business and computing at that time. So and a lot of the universities were venturing into the idea of industrial placement. So I deliberately chose courses that gave me the year out in industry. And and before I went to university, my dad worked for IBM, and he my intent was never to really go into technology, because he used to try and explain what he did at IBM, and I remember just sort of thinking, oh, it just sounded like blah 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 blah. And so I chose the degree, and what I found was the nice thing about the degree, because it was quite modular. You could choose different elements, and so I tended to sort of move away from more the sort of the marketing and accounting side of the degree, and I lean towards the computing side, so I left university with a year's industrial experience. I worked for Hewlett Packard at the time, and then thought, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And so as pre-pandemic, but at the time I said, right, we're gonna go traveling. So armed with very little money and a lot of enthusiasm, sort of went traveling around the world for just over a year, just the most amazing experience of my life. Highly recommend it in normal circumstances, but obviously at the moment it's not something we can really do. And then came back and thought, oh my God, I've got to take things seriously now. So I had left England with a potential job. So IBM had said, yeah, give us a call when you get back. We'll look to sort of put you on graduate scheme. And in those days, because my father had worked for IBM, I'd been able to work for them sort of during various summers. So I built up some, contacts there. Sadly, though, when I got back from traveling, there was a recession at the beginning of the 90s. And so a lot of graduate jobs, they just weren't happening. So interestingly, I then sort of jumped on the milk rounds, went to lots of graduate fairs, and I got a job. And I can sort of see why I thought about this job. But I got a job for a project management consultancy, a very small company in London, and they were running training courses for companies, because companies were converting to PCs. Now, again, for the audience, this is going to seem extraordinary, and I apologize for seeming so old, but people were moving to PCs. So this whole idea of using software, like email software and Excel and Word and various other things. So we did a lot of, so we actually built a lot of training courses, which we've delivered for different companies. Just it sounds silly, but teaching people how to use a mouse. And so I did that. For a couple of years, and what was interesting about that was that it. So whilst it wasn't the most technical job, it forces you very much to think on your feet. Obviously, if you're, I was 23 and I'm standing in front of a room of 30. Middle-aged businessmen who basically never used a computer in their life. So you really do have to think about how you present yourself, and in terms of confidence, it's fantastic. And then I thought, well, hang on, I wasn't suited to sort of do this type of role for the rest of my career. So I thought I've really got to start sort of developing, my technical skills. So I was living in London, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, there's a lot going on in the financial industry. And so I effectively sort of, looked at that, and then I applied for different roles. So I started my job at JP. I worked for a different bank before, but at JP, I started my job on the trading floor. So I was supporting traders from a technology perspective. And I'll be honest with you, there was a lot of, probably a lot of deep breaths and a lot of bravado and a lot of sort of late nights sort of reading different manuals and making sure that I really sort of knew what I was doing. There were times when I think, my God, how do I solve that problem? But it was just the most amazing environment, and from a technology perspective, the Big Bang had happened within financial services. So basically the electronification of sales and trading was happening. And so we were just really just doing so much in terms of technology. And the technology itself was rapidly changing. So it was an incredible time. And I think one of the big things, and I've always said this, that I did at that time was I really tried to understand what the traders themselves were doing. So I had a number of different trading desks and a number of traders that I supported, and they were always more than happy to sort of, if I said, well, what is that? What are you trying to do there? And they very much sort of, start to really sort of explain, and they were very happy to do so. So I started to build up a level of knowledge around what it meant for sales and trading. So it wasn't just about the technology; it was actually about what the sort of the business itself was, and what did that mean, and that's held me in really good stead. And it's been a principle of mine all the way through my career, is that whilst I'm interested in technology, I'm more interested in how technology enables businesses to do the things they do. And when I look today, it's such an exciting time with with some of the tech that's out there, and what cloud can give us, and what we can achieve with blockchain. and the sort of the quantum computing and various other things. So in one sense, when I think back to 1994, which is when I started at JPMorgan, and to where we are now, that whilst the technology's moved on just massively, what has never changed is the fact that ultimately it's all about just enabling the business and just being able to, really support our, our clients, and clients in this case, could be our internal clients or even external clients in achieving the things that they really need to do. So
yeah, wow, it definitely was an exciting field at that stage, and even more so today potentially, which you wouldn't have thought, seen as that was the introduction of PCs, as you mentioned. But at that point, would you have been in kind of a software development role, or was it?
No, less so. So my focus was more around infrastructure engineering. So what I really got into was being able to building servers, configuring equipment, and really sort of more focused around infrastructure. So in the early days, one of the big programs I worked on was effectively what we were doing was we were building out a new computer sort of systems for a particular type of trading. It's called exotics, and very complicated because an exotic trade is made up of multiple different sort of financial instruments. And we were, as a team, what we were looking to do was we were actually looking to create a truly sort of global system where we could build out the back end, but also the front end, and it could sort of work. It could flip between sort of US and the UK, and people weren't doing that in those days. So generally, what was happening was, you would sort of build a computer system and it would be essentially very local. So it would be used by, the 10 or so people that needed to use that. And then you'd have a local backup and various other things. Whereas what we were really trying to do, and we worked a lot with, at the time, we were working with Sun Microsystems, who were then bought by Oracle, and really looking at sort of how can we sort of push the sort of multiple sort of MPP, so parallel processing and various other things. And again, what I think people have to realize is that, in the very early days, computers could do one thing at a time. And then they started to bring in PCs and they could do sort of multiple things at the time. And then you had this whole sort of parallel processing. And it was a really, really fascinating project. And we even got to a point where we started to deploy agents to desktops so that they could do compute processing overnight and various other things. And we were able to do that just the firm allowed us to be innovative and allowed us to really, sort of push the envelope effectively, and in that regard. So my background is very much focused around Unix and building servers. Did some work on the Windows side as well in those days, and really focused around sort of optimization and the engineering from that point of view.
It really is. It's definitely a fascinating field. For me personally, it's definitely something I've always kind of had an interest in, the intersection of finance and tech. But do you think for someone like who's potentially graduating now, looking at jobs in kind of these big banks or financial institutions, do you think it would be important if they've done a technical degree, or let's say computer science, and they might have fantastic programming skills or whatever? Do you think it's necessary going into somewhere like JPMorgan to kind of have a background, or at least know enough about finance? Or do you think you'd be able to go into a technical role and kind of
not really. So over the years, done a lot of graduate interviewing, and there are different roles out there. So there are the sort of pure programming roles, and to a certain extent, there are sort of and even today that there are situations where a programmer will do nothing other than just code. They'll be given a set of requirements, and we joke about it, but they literally just sit them in a cupboard, and very, very little human interaction. And we know that there are people out there that suit that type of role. But a lot of the way we work typically is very much with an agile sort of methodology. So we create these feature teams, and the idea is that you're, from a technology perspective, you're really very focused on delivering a key set of functionality and features, and within that you've got to think about interacting with users. You've got to think about the requirements. You've got to think about, okay, sort of, defining what we want to do, then sort of building what we want to do, and then testing it, and then deploying it. And actually, the great thing about this generation, you guys, is because you've grown up with computers, so you're actually tech savvy because you use your phones every day, because we're Zooming, we're Skyping, whatever we're doing, right? So you have an element of sort of tech savvy. I think so. It's really a question of what people want to do. If they want to code, then that's a very specific, set of aspirations. And but actually, what you really sort of are interested in doing is understanding, what it is to deliver technology that enables a particular business function. So things like a payment process. So, how do you initiate? How do you take a payment from a credit card and take it all the way through its life cycle to the point where, it comes off your credit card and it pays somebody else, and things along those lines. And, the complexity and the scale of financial services means that there's such a breadth that it's almost impossible to expect somebody with necessarily a sort of financial background. So, and also within the firm as well. So, you could start a role working in a feature team that's supporting a back office process for fund accounting, for example. So what it's doing is it's essentially sort of coming up with a value each and every day, right? So very, very specific service. But then you could do that for a couple of years, and then you could move into a team that's supporting trading systems, or could be looking at risk management, or could be looking at cyber, or could be infrastructure engineering. So it's a case of, it's not so much about the financial background, or even to a certain extent the technical background. I think it's about the interest in what you actually want to do. So we find that engineering students generally, maths, so it's all the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. Those types of subjects are very, very good, and the skills are very transferable. Especially with science, because obviously there's a key discipline about science. If you're conducting an experiment, you've got to make sure that you're very clear about what your outcome is. And to a certain extent, technology is not that different. Technology, it's all about solving problems, and it's all about conundrums, and that's essentially what this is really, really all about. So, and that would apply across, whether you're working for tech, a bank in technology, or whether you're working for a technology company, or you could be working for any sort of industry. That the medical industry is another one there's a lot of overlap, because it's about discipline, and ultimately in financial services, we have to be completely accountable for all of the functions and the transactions that we undertake. So everything has to have provenance. So, if I take money from your credit card, it's got to be completely transparent in terms of why I took that money from your credit card and who I paid it to. So you've always got to have that transparency. So it's really about discipline and problem solving and thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, reassuring to hear. I think people are like, I need to do a degree in technology and finance and everything else. But it's probably about learning on the job and just having that interest to kind of move around, as you said. I think that's definitely exciting about big companies like JP. But so obviously going back to your own career, you have gone through many different roles. Would there be one role or project or something that kind of stands out to you over the years that you'd like to talk about, or that was maybe your favorite? Bit of a probably hard to pinpoint one thing, but
it's a really interesting question, actually, and it's one that get asked a lot, and often get asked this question, especially in sort of like management training and development training, sort of personal development training. It's like, what's your sort of career highlights, and they're highlights for lots of different reasons. So obviously, in my career, I've been fortunate enough in the sense that I've been able to sort of develop my career and move through the organization and get to a level of seniority, which is a huge privilege from my perspective. I initiated a project. I worked on a project and actually it's a good 15, 16 years ago now, where we migrated a service from a vendor. So we were using a vendor to provide a specific service, and we migrated the service from that vendor and brought it in-house. And I needed to hire 100 people, and we needed to essentially sort of be able to internally define the service, make it, and then sort of, build out the capability, but then also bringing in 100 new people, training them up very, very quickly. And it was one of those sort of situations where, how the hell do you go out and hire 100 people in literally a matter of months? It was, I was leading the program, but working with the team, there's so much innovation. We ran sort of like whole sort of hiring days. We used hotels, we had sort of people turning up and various other things. And it was a quite extraordinary time. In that, we had to be really, really creative and really, at the end of the day, think, okay, we've got a very finite amount of time. How the hell are we going to sort of, achieve our goals? And the reason it's one of my favorite projects is just because of it went very well, which is always really good. And often people's favorite projects are the ones that really go really badly sometimes. But it went really well, but it was just the fact that, again, it was around innovation. It was around sort of really thinking, okay, how are we going to solve these problems? Working, we had a small sort of project team, and just the camaraderie and the focus was tremendous. My role, really, in some respects, the guys on the ground, they had all their different levels of expertise. My role was really making sure that I was managing all of our sort of stakeholders and customers and clients, and so making sure that people sort of knew what was going on and they understood. So I spent a lot of time traveling, different locations, and really sort of selling the service, which was really, really interesting. So what I'm doing now is incredibly challenging, and there are days when I feel as if my head's in my hands and I'm thinking, oh my God, how do we do this? But again, what we're really sort of looking at, from a firm perspective, is what's the new reality for Brexit. And it's a major change in terms of organizations like ours, in terms of how we position ourselves in Europe. And then how do we position the technology sort of services, and making sure that technology is essentially sort of enabling the businesses to really be successful, and building out a sort of target operating model that's going to sort of be sustainable over the next few years as we evolve into what is a new dynamic. And that's that's fascinating. It's a completely different area. I sort of fell into it, funnily enough, actually, a lot of my career, and I think this is interesting for people to think about. Often things happen sort of by chance or sort of by accident. And I was asked to head up a regulatory inspection in Luxembourg, because they needed somebody with sort of a breadth of experience that I had. So I was asked to sort of head this up, and again, it was all sort of around a sort of similar sort of time. And off the back of this, we realised that actually what we really needed to think about was what the future operating model was going to be. And so now I find myself in essentially the sort of the latter part of my career. I'm now sort of based out of Luxembourg, and I'm I normally would be traveling around Europe, sort of working across our different European locations and everything, but really sort of now building out a future model and a future team that's going to support the European sort of banking side of things.
Okay.
So if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago, probably my outlook would have been very different. And it's amazing how quickly it's changed.
Yeah, that definitely, I can imagine being a very challenging role at the moment, given everything going on. But speaking kind of, given that you're kind of talking about the future and trying to make sure everything's seamless Brexit-wise, is there anything more generally from a banking and technology point of view? You mentioned earlier kind of quantum computing and e-trading and things like that are definitely up and coming. Is there something in particular that you kind of envision for the future of tech and finance, or is there any technologies in particular that you kind of?
There's a really, really I guess so. Really big focus. Technology is a huge enabler, for organisations because it really. So what sort of big companies like ours are moving away from sort of these big sort of legacy platforms, and moving to technology that can be, in some respects, it can sort of, you can sort of break it down into sort of its almost component parts. So cloud gives you the ability of being able to scale very quickly, but also being able to sort of deliver quite bespoke, or very specific sort of, services and solutions. So if you think about the sort of the fintechs that are out there, so if you take a company like Revolut, and Revolut have been quite revolutionary in some of the things that they do, but they provide they provide almost a very specific set of services. So if you take a company like JPMorgan, we do it all, right? So the huge expansive financial services, and what the fintechs have been very good at is providing one particular function or one particular service, and they're really disrupting the market, because actually they go in with a completely different sort of pricing model and service structure, but they're only doing that bit. So I think what's that's forced us to think about, and this is where cloud is very, very good, is it enables us to really sort of ensure that because we have to keep up with the fintech. They're disrupting all of this market, big companies like ours. So they enable us to really think about how we can provide, key sort of very accessible, very, very easy to use services. So in the old days, for example, if a client, an institutional client, and so when I talk about our clients, in terms of the European, I'm talking about the big companies. So when a client banks with JPMorgan, they essentially almost become, it's like we sort of are, it's like we sort of surgically attach ourselves with that client. So that they're linked into us and we're linked into them. And that becomes almost like a hard configuration, and so that takes up a lot of time and effort and energy to set up. Whereas now with cloud and with a lot of the microservices and the technology that's out there, it's very easy for a client to interact with JPMorgan, because we can deliver that service online, through the internet. We can deliver it through people's phones and tablets and laptops and all that sort of stuff. So it's sort of, I think, the nimble piece. Quantum is key. I think quantum will start to will allow from a computational sort of processing perspective, very sort of complex computational sort of equations and algorithms and things, and that'll give you that scale, and it will allow the complexity. So trading, in one sense, is a very simple thing to do. You buy something, you sell something, but actually what quantum then gives you is the capability of making more and more sort of complicated or exotic type products. So therefore you can be innovative in terms of the clients the products that you offer your clients and things. So I think there's a key internally, though, which I think is an interesting thing, and again this is another direct consequence of being able to leverage some of the cloud sort of based technologies, is we're able to, for our developers, we're able to sort of automate a lot of the sort of what we call the software development lifecycle. So the ability to you receive your requirements, you write your code, you test your code, you deploy your code, and we've actually sort of building out now that essentially sort of a way that it all works through a tool chain. So it becomes much more automated, and also where the firm wants to go to is instead of sort of thinking about a software release that happens once a quarter at a weekend, and there's a huge amount of work that's gone into that software release, but there's a huge amount of risk associated with that because it can be very disruptive. Is actually, as a developer, you're deploying and you're committing code 10 times a day, and we will openly admit, we look at firms like Amazon and you look at firms like Google, so you have to look at the tech firms. Amazon, okay, it's a very different industry, but they're deploying tens of thousands of software changes on a daily basis, and that's ultimately the model that you really want to go to move away from this sort of monolithic sort of large scale release and stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. So you would kind of take some modeling from some of those technical companies?
Without a doubt. No, hugely. We look at other industries. Laurie Beer, who's the CIO for JPMorgan, she presented at Amazon Web Services sort of annual conference just recently, and everything. So we work very, very closely with the other tech companies, and we'll look at the operating models for other tech companies. So we've deployed to a certain extent. There's the SRE model, so system reliability engineering and DevOps, and a lot of that looking at a lot of the work that Google did around that field. So I would openly say that I've built my career on stealing or leveraging the best ideas that other people have come up with. In some respects, there's always a situation where someone else has come up with a solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's one of the great things about JPMorgan, is that we can, because we're so large, that often there are solutions that you can already leverage elsewhere.
That's really exciting. Quite interesting to hear as well. I wouldn't have thought, at least, that the companies would admit to that, but I like that it's an open and kind of, inspirational. But I think we might leave it there. I don't want to keep you too long. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing so much insightful information and honest words about your career. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Very busy lady. Best of luck with all of your future endeavors, and I hope all the Brexit planning and everything goes to plan.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Molly, thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very, very much.
All right,
bye guys. See you next time on the series. Bye.